The deepest betrayals rarely come from strangers. They come from the people you trust enough to never question. Ethan believed he had already found everything that mattered. At 29, he wasn't rich. He didn't own a luxury car or live in a beautiful mansion. Most mornings began before sunrise, and most nights ended long after everyone else had gone home. He worked hard because he believed every honest step would eventually lead to the life he dreamed of. That dream had a name: Olivia. For 3 wonderful years, she had been the center of his world. They talked endlessly about their future, imagined the home they would one day buy, and laughed about the family they hoped to raise. They weren't living a glamorous life, but Ethan never saw that as a problem. To him, love wasn't measured by expensive vacations or designer clothes. It was measured by loyalty, by trust, by standing beside each other when life became difficult. Whenever someone asked Ethan about his future, he smiled confidently. "I already have everything I need. The rest will come with time." Olivia always smiled back, or at least, that's what he believed. There was one other important person in Ethan's life. His childhood best friend, James. James had everything Ethan didn't. He drove luxury cars, wore expensive suits, traveled whenever he wanted, and never seemed to worry about money. People admired him everywhere he went. Restaurants welcomed him like a celebrity, and expensive gifts came naturally to him. Yet Ethan never felt jealous. James had been his friend since they were boys. He trusted him completely. James often joined Ethan and Olivia for dinner, birthdays, and weekend outings. Ethan enjoyed seeing the two people he cared about getting along so well. Sometimes James surprised Olivia with thoughtful gifts. Sometimes he insisted on paying for dinner. Sometimes he joked that Ethan was lucky to have found someone as wonderful as Olivia. Ethan laughed every time. He saw kindness. He never saw warning signs. What Ethan couldn't see were the quiet moments that happened when he wasn't around. The longer conversations, the secret smiles, the growing excitement every time James's name appeared on Olivia's phone. Small choices were quietly changing everything. While Ethan worked overtime to build a better future for the woman he loved, another future was slowly being built behind his back. He believed loyalty could never be broken. He believed true love could never be replaced by money. But before long, Ethan would discover that not everyone measured love the same way. And the two people he trusted more than anyone else were about to teach him a lesson that would change his life forever. The next evening, Ethan walked toward the restaurant with a smile on his face. Olivia had asked him to meet her for dinner, saying she had something important to share. Ethan couldn't stop thinking about the future they had planned together. On his way, he even stopped to buy a small bouquet of white roses. He imagined laughter. He imagined another beautiful memory. Instead, he walked into the darkest moment of his life. As the hostess led him to the table, Ethan froze. Olivia wasn't alone. James was sitting beside her. Not across from her. Beside her. The two of them looked at each other before turning their attention to Ethan. The warm smile on Ethan's face disappeared. His heart sank without a single word being spoken. Slowly, he placed the flowers on the table. No one reached for them. Olivia took a deep breath. "Ethan, I'm sorry." Those 3 words felt heavier than anything he had ever heard. She lowered her eyes for a moment before looking back at him. "I've made my decision." The room suddenly felt smaller. "I've chosen James." Silence filled the space between them. Ethan searched her face, hoping she was joking. She wasn't. Tears gathered in her eyes, but her voice remained steady. "I want a different life. I want security. I want opportunities that I don't think we'll ever have together." Every word cut deeper than the last. Before Ethan could respond, James leaned back in his chair with complete confidence. "Don't take it personally," he said. "Life rewards the strongest. Sometimes people simply choose the better future." Those words echoed through Ethan's mind. Not because they were true, but because they came from the man he had called his best friend since childhood. Years of friendship had been traded for pride. Years of love had been replaced by wealth. Ethan looked at both of them. He realized neither of them expected him to fight. Neither expected him to beg. He quietly picked up the untouched bouquet. For a brief moment, he looked at Olivia. "I truly loved you," he said softly. Then he turned to James. "And I trusted you." Without another word, Ethan walked toward the exit. The cool night air hit his face as he stepped outside. Behind him were the woman he planned to marry and the friend he believed would always stand beside him. Ahead of him was nothing but uncertainty. He didn't know it yet, but the life that had just fallen apart would become the foundation for something far greater than either of them could ever imagine. Ethan walked out of the restaurant with nothing but the clothes he was wearing and a heart that felt heavier than ever before. That night, he couldn't sleep. Every memory of Olivia replayed in his mind. Every laugh they shared, every promise they made, every plan for the future. Now those dreams belonged to someone else. Within a week, Ethan packed his belongings into a few worn-out boxes and moved into a tiny one-bedroom apartment on the edge of the city. The place was old, quiet, and almost empty. A second-hand mattress sat on the floor beside a small table and a single chair. It wasn't the life he imagined, but it was all he could afford. As the weeks passed, life became even harder. Bills piled up on the kitchen counter. Job interviews ended with polite rejection emails. His savings disappeared little by little. Some days he skipped meals just to keep the lights on. The silence inside the apartment became his only companion. Meanwhile, word about the breakup spread quickly. People whispered that Olivia had made the smart choice. Others claimed Ethan had simply been left behind because he lacked ambition. Every rumor hurt, but instead of defending himself, Ethan stayed silent. One rainy evening, he stood in front of the small bathroom mirror and barely recognized the man staring back at him. His eyes looked tired. His shoulders carried the weight of disappointment. For the first time, he asked himself whether everyone else had been right. Then something inside him changed. He realized he had two choices. He could spend the rest of his life blaming Olivia and James for what happened. Or he could use the pain to build a future no one could take away. That night, Ethan made a promise to himself. He would stop chasing people who chose to leave. He would start chasing the person he was capable of becoming. The next morning, he woke up before sunrise. He organized his apartment, updated his resume, read books instead of replaying old memories, applied for new opportunities, learned new skills every evening. Progress was slow. Some days it felt invisible. But every small step moved him farther away from the man who had walked out of that restaurant broken. The betrayal had taken away his relationship. It had taken away his closest friend. But it had also awakened something far more powerful. For the first time in his life, Ethan wasn't building his future for someone else. He was building it for himself. And although he couldn't see it yet, that quiet decision would become the turning point that changed everything. Months passed after Ethan moved into the tiny apartment. The pain of betrayal didn't disappear overnight. Some mornings he still woke up remembering Olivia's smile. Some nights he still heard James's words echoing in his mind. But instead of letting those memories control him, Ethan turned them into fuel. Every day began before sunrise. He made his bed, exercised, and sat at his small desk with a notebook full of goals. He promised himself that every new day would be better than the last. After work, while others relaxed or scrolled through social media, Ethan opened business books, watched online classes, and practiced new skills late into the night. There were no shortcuts, no lucky breaks, just discipline. Week after week, month after month, people rarely noticed him anymore. His old friends assumed he was still struggling. Olivia and James never heard from him. As far as they knew, Ethan had disappeared. They believed they had chosen the winning side. What they didn't know was that silence had become Ethan's greatest advantage. He stopped trying to impress people. He stopped explaining himself. Instead, he let his actions speak where his words never could. After saving every extra dollar he earned, Ethan finally took the biggest risk of his life. He started a small business. At first, it was nothing more than a tiny office, one laptop, and endless determination. Some days there were no customers. Some weeks barely covered the bills. More than once, he wondered if he had made a terrible mistake. But quitting was no longer an option. He remembered the promise he had made to himself on that lonely night. He wasn't building a business to prove Olivia wrong. He wasn't chasing success to defeat James. He was building a future that no one could ever take away again. Slowly, the impossible began to happen. One satisfied customer became 2. 2 became 10. Good work led to referrals. Small opportunities turned into bigger ones. The business wasn't famous, not yet, but its foundation was becoming stronger every single day. Late one evening, Ethan locked the office door and looked back at the small space with a quiet smile. It wasn't impressive to anyone else, but to him, it represented something priceless. Hope. The same man who had once left a restaurant with a broken heart was now creating a future with his own hands. Nobody was applauding. Nobody was watching. And that was exactly how Ethan wanted it. Because sometimes the greatest success is built in complete silence. By the time the world finally noticed his name, the hardest part of the journey would already be behind him. Years of quiet work had finally brought Ethan to a moment he never thought would arrive. His small company was no longer fighting just to survive. It was ready for something bigger. One ordinary Tuesday morning, Ethan received a phone call that would change his life forever. A respected national company wanted to partner with his business. It wasn't luck. It wasn't a favor. It was the reward for years of showing up, delivering quality work, and keeping every promise he made. Ethan sat quietly in his office after signing the agreement. He didn't celebrate with a luxury vacation. He didn't post the news online. Instead, he closed his eyes for a moment and whispered, "Thank you." He remembered the tiny apartment, the unpaid bills, the sleepless nights, the heartbreak that almost convinced him to quit. Every painful step had led to this moment. The contract opened doors Ethan never imagined. New clients began calling every week. His team grew from a handful of employees to dozens of talented people who believed in the company's mission. Investors reached out, eager to support the business. Industry leaders invited Ethan to speak at conferences and business events. Before long, magazines and business websites were sharing his story. People called him one of the country's most respected young entrepreneurs. But success never changed the man Ethan had become. He still arrived at the office before everyone else. He still greeted every employee with a smile. He remembered birthdays. He listened more than he spoke. He treated the newest intern with the same respect he showed experienced executives. His employees didn't follow him because he was successful. They followed him because he cared. Meanwhile, Olivia and James continued living their lives without knowing what Ethan had built. To them, he was still the man who walked away from the restaurant carrying a bouquet of white roses. They had no idea that while they were chasing appearances, Ethan had been building something real. Late one evening, Ethan stood by the large window of his new headquarters, looking over the city lights. He smiled, not because he had become wealthy, but because he had become the man he promised himself he would be. The betrayal that once felt like the end of his story had become the beginning of a completely different life. And although the world was finally starting to notice his success, an even greater surprise was waiting just around the corner. Very soon, the people who once walked away from Ethan would come face to face with the man they never believed he could become. While Ethan's future continued to rise, another story was quietly moving in the opposite direction. From the outside, Olivia and James looked like they had everything. Their social media was filled with luxury vacations, elegant dinners, expensive cars, and smiling photographs. Friends admired them. Strangers envied them. Everyone believed they were living the dream. But cameras only captured moments. They never captured the truth. Behind the doors of their beautiful home, the laughter had slowly disappeared. Small disagreements became daily arguments. Simple conversations turned into long nights of silence. The trust that should have held their relationship together was fading. James had built his life on winning. Now he questioned everyone around him. If Olivia could leave Ethan for someone with more money, what would stop her from leaving him one day? That thought stayed in his mind. He became suspicious, protective, distant. Olivia noticed the change. The man who once impressed her with expensive gifts no longer made her feel safe. The luxury that had once excited her became ordinary. The designer clothes, expensive restaurants, and beautiful house filled the space around her, but they couldn't fill the emptiness inside her heart. One evening, another argument ended with complete silence. Olivia looked around the large living room. Everything she had dreamed about was right in front of her. Yet she had never felt more alone. For the first time, she remembered Ethan. Not because of what he owned, but because of how he made her feel. She remembered his patience, his kindness, the way he always listened before speaking. Those memories became impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, James walked into his home office and poured himself a drink. He stared through the window, frustrated by a success that suddenly felt meaningless. Money had given him everything he wanted. But somehow, it had taken away his peace. Neither of them said it out loud. Neither wanted to admit it. But both were beginning to understand the same painful truth. They had mistaken wealth for happiness. And they had sacrificed loyalty to chase it. Across the city, Ethan knew nothing about the storms growing inside their home. He remained focused on leading his company, supporting his employees, and building a future based on honesty and hard work. He wasn't looking back. He wasn't waiting for anyone to regret their choices. But life has a way of bringing unfinished stories back together. Very soon, the paths of Ethan, Olivia, and James would cross again. This time, everything would be different. And the people who believed they had chosen the better life would be forced to face the man they left behind. Months after becoming one of the country's most respected young entrepreneurs, Ethan's calendar was filled with meetings, partnerships, and charity projects. Success had changed his schedule, but it hadn't changed his heart. He still believed that real success meant lifting others as you climbed. One afternoon, his assistant walked into his office carrying a black envelope sealed with a gold emblem. "It just arrived," she said with a smile. Ethan thanked her and carefully opened it. Inside was an invitation to one of the most exclusive charity galas in the country. The event would bring together leading entrepreneurs, investors, business executives, and community leaders to raise money for scholarships and children's hospitals. As one of the event's major sponsors, Ethan had been invited as an honored guest and keynote speaker. He looked at the elegant invitation for a moment before placing it on his desk. He wasn't excited about the spotlight. He cared more about the people the event would help. Without hesitation, he accepted the invitation. Across the city, another invitation arrived at a luxurious penthouse. James had also been invited because of his business connections. Olivia smiled when she saw the elegant card. "It'll be nice to get out for a night," she said quietly. James nodded, hoping the event would distract them from the tension that had slowly taken over their relationship. Neither of them had any reason to believe the evening would be different from any other high-profile gathering. Neither of them noticed one important detail printed near the bottom of the invitation. Special keynote address by Ethan Madison, founder and CEO of Madison Innovations. They barely glanced at the program before setting it aside. The name meant nothing to them. Years had passed. The Ethan they remembered was a struggling young man carrying a bouquet of white roses out of a restaurant. The man on the invitation was someone they never imagined could exist. Meanwhile, Ethan prepared for the gala with the same quiet confidence that had guided him through every challenge. He wasn't attending to impress anyone. He wasn't searching for closure. As far as he knew, that chapter of his life had ended years ago. But sometimes life has a different plan. On the night of the gala, 3 lives would walk into the same grand ballroom for the first time since the betrayal. 1 carried peace. 2 carried regret. None of them knew that before the evening was over, old wounds would reopen, hidden truths would surface, and a single unexpected reunion would change every life in the room forever. The grand ballroom buzzed with conversation as business leaders, investors, and entrepreneurs greeted one another beneath sparkling crystal chandeliers. Olivia and James moved through the crowd, exchanging polite smiles and small talk. For a moment, everything seemed normal. Then the entrance doors opened. A tall man in a perfectly tailored navy blue suit stepped inside with calm confidence. His posture was steady. His smile was genuine. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He simply belonged there. Olivia glanced toward the entrance without much interest. Then she froze. Her heart skipped a beat. The man looked familiar. She studied his face again. The sharp jawline. The kind blue eyes. The quiet confidence. It couldn't be Ethan, she whispered almost to herself. James turned to look. His expression changed instantly. The struggling young man he remembered was gone. Standing at the entrance was someone completely different. Before either of them could react, several influential business executives crossed the ballroom toward Ethan. One after another, they shook his hand. "Ethan, it's great to see you again. Congratulations on your company's incredible growth. We're looking forward to working with you on our next project." Another executive smiled warmly. "Your keynote speech is the reason many of us came tonight." James stared in disbelief. He recognized those executives immediately. They were some of the most respected names in the business world. These were people who rarely approached anyone first. Yet they were greeting Ethan with genuine admiration. The conversations around the ballroom slowly faded. More guests gathered around Ethan. Investors thanked him for his leadership. Young entrepreneurs asked for advice. Charity organizers praised his generosity and commitment to helping others. Ethan welcomed every conversation with humility. He listened carefully. He smiled often. He treated every person with the same respect, whether they were a CEO or a volunteer. There was no arrogance, no desire to prove anyone wrong. Just quiet confidence earned through years of hard work. Across the room, Olivia couldn't take her eyes off him. She remembered the man who had walked out of the restaurant carrying a bouquet of white roses. Now she was looking at a man who carried himself with dignity, purpose, and strength. James felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Regret, not because Ethan had become wealthy, but because he had completely underestimated him. The ballroom doors closed as the master of ceremonies stepped onto the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced with a smile, "please welcome tonight's keynote speaker and one of our nation's most respected young entrepreneurs, Mr. Ethan Madison." The entire room rose to its feet in applause. Only Olivia and James remained frozen in place. For the first time since the betrayal, they finally understood the truth. They hadn't walked away from a failure. They had walked away from a man who had become everything they never believed he could be. The applause slowly faded as Ethan stepped away from the stage after delivering his keynote speech. His message wasn't about becoming rich. It was about perseverance, integrity, and choosing character over bitterness. The audience gave him another standing ovation. As guests gathered around him, the conversations changed. No one talked about Ethan's wealth first. They talked about the kind of man he had become. One elderly businessman smiled as he spoke to a small group nearby. "I've worked with Ethan for 3 years," he said. "I've never seen him break a promise. If he gives you his word, you can trust it." Another executive nodded. "Our company faced a difficult situation last year. Ethan could have taken advantage of us, but instead he offered a fair solution. That's the kind of leader people respect." A charity director joined the conversation. "Many people donate when cameras are watching. Ethan helps families when no one even knows he's there." Across the ballroom, Olivia listened to every word. No one was praising Ethan because of expensive cars. No one admired him simply because his company had grown. They admired his honesty, his generosity, his humility. Tears slowly filled her eyes. For years, she had believed she left Ethan because he wasn't successful enough. Now she understood the painful truth. She hadn't lost Ethan because he lacked potential. She lost him because she judged his future by his present. She had mistaken temporary struggle for permanent failure. Nearby, James stood in complete silence. He looked around the ballroom and noticed something he had never truly understood before. People weren't respecting Ethan because they feared him. They weren't following him because of his money. They genuinely admired him. His reputation had been built one honest decision at a time. James remembered the words he had spoken years ago inside the restaurant. "Life rewards the strongest." Back then, he believed strength came from wealth and influence. Tonight, he realized real strength looked very different. It looked like discipline. It looked like kindness. It looked like earning trust instead of demanding attention. As Ethan greeted another guest with the same warm smile he gave everyone else, James quietly lowered his head. For the first time in his life, he understood that success could purchase luxury, but it could never buy respect. Respect had to be earned. And Ethan had earned every bit of it. Across the room, Ethan briefly noticed Olivia and James standing together. He offered a polite smile before turning back to the people around him. There was no anger in his eyes. No desire to embarrass them. Only peace. Because the greatest victory wasn't becoming more successful than the people who hurt him. It was becoming the man he had always hoped to be. The charity gala was slowly coming to an end. Guests continued talking and laughing as waiters cleared the tables, but in one quiet corner of the ballroom, 3 people stood face to face for the first time in years. Ethan looked calmly at Olivia and James. Neither of them knew how to begin. The silence felt heavier than any argument they had ever shared. Finally, Olivia took a slow breath. "I'm sorry, Ethan," she said softly. Her voice trembled. "I spent years believing money could give me the life I wanted. I thought success was something you already had or didn't have. I never saw the man you were becoming." Tears rolled down her face. "I didn't leave because you lacked potential. I left because I judged you too quickly. And that's something I've regretted for a long time." Ethan listened without interrupting. His expression remained calm. There was no anger, only quiet reflection. James stepped forward next. For the first time since Ethan had known him, confidence was missing from his face. "I betrayed my best friend," he admitted. "I told myself I was simply taking an opportunity. The truth is, I let pride and selfishness destroy years of friendship." He lowered his head. "You trusted me, and I broke that trust. No amount of success can erase what I did." The words hung in the air. Ethan remembered everything. The restaurant, the bouquet of white roses slipping from his hand, the tiny apartment, the sleepless nights, the endless job applications, the lonely evenings when giving up seemed easier than moving forward. Those memories would always be part of his story. But they no longer controlled his heart. After a long pause, Ethan finally spoke. "I won't pretend those years didn't hurt," he said gently. "They changed me forever." Olivia and James listened without saying a word. "But something else happened," Ethan continued. "The pain forced me to become stronger, wiser, and more grateful than I ever would have been otherwise." He smiled. "Not with pride, but with peace. I spent too many years building a better future to let bitterness become part of it." He looked at both of them with honesty. "I forgive you." Neither Olivia nor James expected those words. They stood silently, overwhelmed by the kindness they no longer believed they deserved. Ethan offered each of them a respectful handshake before turning toward the ballroom exit. He wasn't walking away because he hated them. He was walking forward because he had finally found peace. And in that quiet moment, everyone understood something money could never buy. The greatest victory isn't making the people who hurt you suffer. It's reaching a place where they no longer have the power to steal your joy. The ballroom had grown quiet. Most of the guests had already left, but Ethan, Olivia, and James remained standing together. The apology had been spoken. The truth had finally come out. Now, only one thing remained unsaid. Olivia looked at Ethan with hope in her eyes. James stood silently beside her, waiting for Ethan's response. Ethan smiled gently before speaking. "I need both of you to understand something." His voice was calm. "I never spent my life trying to make either of you regret your decision." Olivia lowered her eyes. James listened without moving. "When I walked away that night, I was broken," Ethan continued. "For a long time, I thought my life was over. But one day I realized something important." He paused for a moment. "If I spent every day chasing revenge, then you would still be controlling my future." The words settled into the silence. "So I made a different choice. I decided to fight for my dreams instead. I worked because I wanted to become someone I could be proud of. I learned because I refused to let failure define me. I built my company because I wanted to prove something, not to the world, not to either of you, but to myself." He smiled again. "That became my greatest victory." Olivia wiped away another tear. "I wish I had believed in you," she whispered. James nodded slowly. "So do I." Ethan looked at them both with kindness. "I truly forgive both of you." Their faces filled with relief. But forgiveness and rebuilding trust are not always the same thing. Neither of them spoke. Some relationships can be repaired. Others become lessons that help us grow. I've found peace with what happened. But the life I've built now requires healthy boundaries. I hope both of you find happiness. I sincerely mean that, but my journey has taken me in a different direction. For a moment, no one said a word. There was no anger left. No bitterness. Only acceptance. Olivia finally understood that forgiveness was a gift, not an invitation to return to the past. James realized that one sincere apology could not erase years of broken trust. As Ethan walked toward the ballroom doors, he felt lighter than ever before. He wasn't leaving because he had won. He was leaving because he no longer needed to prove anything. The greatest success of his life wasn't the company he had built. It wasn't the awards. It wasn't the wealth. It was becoming a man whose heart remained strong without becoming hard. And that was a victory no one could ever take away. Ethan stepped out of the Grand Hotel ballroom into the cool evening air. The city lights stretched across the skyline, brighter than ever. For a moment, he stood quietly, taking it all in. Just a few years earlier, he had walked away from a restaurant with a broken heart, wondering if his life would ever be the same again. That night had felt like the end of everything. But now he understood something he couldn't have seen back then. It wasn't the end, it was the beginning. He smiled as he remembered the long nights in his tiny apartment. The rejection letters, the unpaid bills, the lonely mornings when nobody believed in him except himself. Every challenge had taught him patience. Every failure had built resilience. Every disappointment had shaped his character. If Olivia had never left, if James had never betrayed him, he might never have discovered the strength that had always been inside him. The pain hadn't destroyed him. It had introduced him to the person he was capable of becoming. As Ethan walked toward his car, he felt no anger, no bitterness, no desire to prove anything. He had already won the only battle that truly mattered. The battle against fear, the battle against self-doubt, the battle against giving up. His company had become successful. His reputation had earned respect. But those were only rewards. The real success was waking up every morning with peace in his heart. He had learned that money could create comfort, but character created fulfillment. He had learned that success meant very little if it came at the cost of kindness. And he had learned that forgiveness wasn't something you gave to excuse the past. It was something you gave yourself so the past could no longer control your future. As the driver opened the car door, Ethan looked back at the hotel one final time. Inside were people who had once been the center of his world. Now they were simply part of his journey. He wished them well. Then he looked forward, because that was where his future had always been waiting. The road ahead was filled with new opportunities, new dreams, and new people who would value him for the man he had become. And as the car disappeared into the glowing city streets, one final truth remained. Sometimes the people who walk away from you don't destroy your future, they unknowingly help you discover your greatest strength. The best revenge is becoming someone who no longer needs their approval. That is the kind of victory that lasts forever.